Well, this is one of those days that doesn't come along very often. Today, the talks between Israelis and Palestinians are beginning. As a matter of fact, they're ongoing even while I speak to you. They were scheduled for dinner at Secretary of State John Kerry's house in Washington, D.C., and then they're going to be talking probably late into the night, of course. I guess since it's in Washington, they probably have not started yet. I was thinking about Israeli time and how that in Israel, they're 8 hours ahead of us. So they're probably not yet having dinner, but they will be soon. And Zippy Livni is here with Mr. Malko, who is Prime Minister Netanyahu's personal right-hand trusted aide. He will be negotiating together with Zippy Livni. Mr. Erekat is going to be negotiating for the Palestinians. They are all meeting at John Kerry's house this evening. They will be breaking the ice. It's going to be a dinner designed to warm everyone up, get everyone friendly, and then they will start talking yet tonight about the format that the talks will take. The talks will pick up back up in the morning, and they're hoping to create the agenda for the talks. What are we going to discuss first? How can we effectively proceed? Now, let me remind you, ladies and gentlemen, that this is a vexing, ongoing conflict ever since 1948. There's been no peace deal between Palestinians and Israelis since 1948. The closest was the Oslo Accords, and it has fallen apart and has not worked well. So this is indeed an historic occasion, especially since there are reasons to believe that results may be obtained. We may, in fact, see a peace agreement between Palestinians and Israelis, and not just any peace agreement, but it looks like we could see the agreement spoken of in the Bible that will mark the beginning of the final 7 years to the Battle of Armageddon and the second coming of Jesus Christ. Now, stop. Let's make sure we wrap our minds around this. What I'm telling you is that John Kerry has set in motion negotiations. He thinks these negotiations will take about 9 months, at the end of which, if they are successful, the final 7 years to Armageddon would begin, and the final 3.5 years to the revealing of the Antichrist would begin. Within the first 3.5 years, a Jewish temple will be built on the Temple Mount, and the Great Tribulation will begin after the first 3.5 years. That's not nearly all, but that's just a little sampling of the impact of what is beginning this evening at the house of Secretary of State John Kerry in Washington, D.C. I have this feeling in the pit of my stomach that this is not just another one of those, well, good try, no luck. But I just get the feeling that we're getting down to crunch time here. Now, I'm not willing to make a prediction as to what's going to happen or how soon it's going to happen, but there are many factors closing in on Israel right now that seem to mandate that Israel is going to be forced to move to some kind of an agreement. Before we go over some of the things that they will be discussing, some of the things that they're going to be discussing this evening, when they try to put the agenda together, I've listed some of the main topics of the negotiations. But before we go there, I'd like to take a little bit of time to go through an article. It's entitled, Israel and Palestinians to Resume Peace Talks in Washington on Monday night. Just to give you the flavor of what's happening here. The Israeli and Palestinian negotiating teams will resume peace talks Monday night in Washington, D.C., after the cabinet on Sunday approved the release of 104 Palestinian prisoners who have been imprisoned since before the signing of the Oslo Accords in 1993. So these 104 prisoners have been in jail over 20 years. The Palestinians have been requesting their release. Now, Israel may never have intended to release them because many of them have blood on their hands. Many of them according to Israel, are guilty of killing Israelis. They call them terrorists. The Palestinians call them freedom fighters. The Palestinians say, well, many of your soldiers have killed our people, and we think that's just as bad as us killing your people. We are two nations at war. And Israel understands that language because they know what it's like for today's terrorist to become tomorrow's prime minister. Menachem Begin had a price on his head of $100,000 for 5 years, and that's back in 1946, 1947, when $100,000 was really $100,000. So he ended up becoming the prime minister of Israel and ended up signing a peace deal with Egypt, with Anwar Sadat. So Israel has lived in this atmosphere a long time, and they understand that today's terrorist may be tomorrow's prime minister. So it's not quite as difficult for them to make these decisions as it might be for some of us. However, it is difficult because you have families still living in Israel writing letters to their prime minister saying, please don't let the murderer that killed my son go free. They are outside the prime minister's residence with placards beseeching him not to do this. So there's a tremendous amount of pressure that builds up when it comes time to release some of these prisoners as a goodwill gesture in order to open the door for these peace talks. Abbas dug his heels in the concrete and said, we will not come to the table unless these people are released. Now, there's thousands of others remaining in Israeli jails, but these have been there over 20 years. And so consequently, the cabinet voted in Israel yesterday to go ahead and release these 104 prisoners. Now, they will not be released tomorrow. They're going to be released in segments. I think it's going to be over the 9-month period. So at the end of 2 months, maybe 25 of them will be released, and so on and so on and so on. Netanyahu says, and if the Palestinians do things that violate our agreement, then we will stop releasing the prisoners. So this is sort of a built-in reward as you go. If you perform this much, then we will have some more prisoners released. And of course, there are people in the Palestinian territories saying to Mahmoud Abbas, please get my dad back home. Please get my son back home. So these prisoners have become somewhat of political footballs between the Palestinians and the Israelis. Now, Mr. Netanyahu made a speech knowing the passion that surrounds these prisoners, some of them that have killed Israelis, members of families that are still living in Israel. Knowing the volatility of this particular issue, Netanyahu actually sent an open letter to everyone. He published it so that the Israeli people could read it. And he said, I understand how you feel. I am going through a lot of pain making this decision. And let me remind you that 37 years ago, I lost my brother to terrorists. I myself was shot by terrorists when I was in the service. I know what it's like to have bullets flying by my head. And so I live with this pain of the loss of my brother every day, and I understand what you're feeling. However, there are times when it's for the good of the state of Israel that a prime minister has to make very difficult decisions. So he did make the decision. He took a vote in his cabinet. The decision cleared by 13-7 with 2 abstentions. So it passed with a majority. And now then the talks are beginning. Now, Abbas knows what this means to him because this gives him credibility. I mean, he's been in the office a long time, and a lot of people think he's done nothing except make himself wealthy by siphoning off a lot of the money that's flowing into the Palestinian territories from the West. And so a lot of people think he's a corrupt leader, but now then he's going to be delivering some of their sons and fathers back home as a result of this agreement. So he's going to gain some favor. He's going to be seen still as a person that is able to exercise some power and to give the Palestinians what they want. Well, anyway, it looks like all this is coming together. Tremendous pressure, not only on the Israelis, but on the Palestinians. Let me read you a little bit more of this article. Justice Minister Tzipi Livni will represent Israel along with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's special envoy, Isaac Molho. The two flew to Washington last night. The Palestinians will be represented by Chief Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat. The sides will meet at the iftar dinner that breaks the Ramadan fast. This is Ramadan right now, and so Muslims fast until sundown. They're going to have the iftar dinner that breaks the Ramadan fast that will be held at the home of U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry within just a matter of a few hours. The dinner will be relatively informal and is intended to primarily to establish a friendly atmosphere. However, a senior Israeli official noted that the parties will begin discussing the agenda for the negotiations during the dinner. The talks will serve as an opportunity to develop a procedural work plan for how the parties can proceed with the negotiations in the coming months. The article goes on to say the delegations will also meet with Kerry again in the State Department building Tuesday to continue talks on the principles for conducting the negotiations, the issues up for discussion, and a timetable for further meetings. At Tuesday's end, a joint press statement will be read out by the Secretary of State that will officially declare the start of the negotiations. The meeting in Washington was made possible after the the Israeli cabinet voted yesterday to release the prisoners who were involved in the murder of Israelis. At the end of the 5-hour debate, 13 ministers voted in favor, 7 voted against, and 2 abstained. Finally, there's a steep price to this decision, Netanyahu said, but not launching the diplomatic process carries an even heavier price. Netanyahu is very cognizant that the international pressure is closing in on Israel. The European Union has decided to boycott all products coming out of the West Bank. The international community voted that the pre-1967 borders should be the borders between Israel and the Palestinian territory. That vote was carried by 138 to 9. Netanyahu understands the pressure is on.